drank that whole shake? A while back I was working on a special order for a small pair of earrings, 7mm, cut into a Portuguese design, which has 145 facets, quite a lot for such a small stone. But the earrings are stunning and the client was very happy. Because it was a drop everything special order, I ended up having to grab a larger piece of amethyst than I normally would have used to cut 7mm round design. And the result was, when I was ready to transfer the stone to cut the upper half, I had a very long cone shape, which had already been sized for the earrings to 7mm, and I'd already polished and cut the girdle. So instead of wasting the extra rough, I took the stone when I had both sides dopped and ready to transfer to my trim saw and cut the cone in half. Well, not exactly in half, as I wanted to make sure I had enough space on the side where I was cutting the earrings. The other side ended up smaller than I thought, and it had a small fracture in it. So I needed to cut a design that doesn't have much height, and not as much height as a Portuguese cut. For a design, I already had one in mind. I've always wanted to cut Ring of Fire, which is a great design for flatter, and I'm talking like a pancake shaped rough. This design was created by Jay Hammer, and he has put this design into the public domain for any faceter to try to cut. The design is available on the facetdiagrams.org website. Now notice that the height to width ratio for this design is only 0.285, which means that you multiply the width of the stone that you want to cut by 0.285, and that is how much height your rough needs to cut this stone. As a comparison, the height to width ratio for a Portuguese cut is almost, well, is 0.674. So Ring of Fire is not quite 1/3 the height of a Portuguese gemstone. Like I said, it's a great design for flatter rough. The girdle of the Portuguese cut has 16 facets on it, and you start cutting at the 96 index tooth, and you cut every 6 indexes or teeth around the stone. The girdle for Ring of Fire also has 16 facets, but you start cutting at the number 3 tooth instead of the 96, and you cut again every 6 teeth around the stone. So, will the girdle for a Portuguese cut work for the girdle of a Ring of Fire? Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter that you start at the 3 tooth instead of the 96 tooth. All you have to do is align the stone in the quill of your machine so that one of the facets on the girdle, the flat facet, is on the 3 tooth. Okay, we want to set up our girdle so that it's flush on one of the facets of the girdles, okay? So, right there, and then we tighten up our set screw. Now what we're doing is we've set our index not to 96 like it was when we cut the Portuguese, but we set the index to 3. So now that flat facet which we cut in the previous design on the 96 index, that flat facet is now being cut on the 3 facet. So we've converted the 3 index. So we've converted between the two sets of instructions, and we're set up to cut our Ring of Fire. Okay, for our Ring of Fire, what I decided to do was, it's already pretty much preformed. The girdle's already polished. So what I wanted to do was start with the P3 and just work it up to a center point instead of starting with the P1 or P2. So I started with the P3 to make a center point, and then I did the P2 instructions and I did the P3 and the P2 with my 600 grit diamond topper lap. And now I'll switch to my 12M, which is in mils at microns. So it's about a 1500 grit lap, but most of you are using a 1200 grit lap. It's the same thing, except it was made in Ukraine, so it has microns. So with my 12M, now I'll go cut the P1, P2, and P3 again, and then I believe I'll be ready to polish. This is a simple design, not much to it. And the reason I want to cut the pavilion with as little waste as possible is because there's an inclusion on the other side of the rough that I want to avoid, and I'll show you that. Right there is the inclusion that I want to avoid. So I just made the minimum with my 600 grit lap to make a permanent center point there with the P3 set of instructions. Then I went back to the P2, and now the P1 so simple. I mean, such a small facet to cut. I'm going to go to my 12M, and I'll cut the P1. Then I'll recut the P2 and P3 with my 12M. And because it's quartz and because it's such a small stone, I believe I'll go straight to polish. Again, this leftover trim piece, there's virtually very little work, probably the simplest design that I've cut. And there's no reason to throw that piece of rough away. We'll turn it into the ring of fire pretty quickly. Okay, I'm ready to go to polish. I'll use the creamway lap by Gearloose with cerium oxide and water spray. So there's still a lot of facets, although this is a ring of fire is a thin stone, there's still a lot of facets. A standard round brilliant has 73 facets, the normal gemstone that you're going to see most of the time in the mall, whereas the ring of fire has 97. So it's 97 facets versus 73. So there's still a lot of facets to cut and polish in this stone, but cuts and polishes very quickly, and I'll continue to polish the pavilion. I finished polishing the pavilion of our ring of fire, the bottom half, and with the creamway lap and cerium oxide water spray. And now I will transfer the stone and cut the upper half, and then we'll be finished. So because this amethyst was already preformed, the girdle was already ready to go, polished, and because it's small stone, I was able to start with my 600 grit topper lap and make the first pass on the facets. The girdle's a little bit bigger than I want, so when I go through the next lap, which will be my 12M, about a 1500 grit, about a 1200 grit lap, I'll get the girdle right about where I want it. And then there's one other row of facets at the 22.5 angle. This first set's at the 24.7, so there's not much of a difference. So I didn't want to cut that second row with my 600. Probably cut it with the 12M, and then I'll go over everything with the 13,000 grit diamond on a bat lap. And the difference between a 13,000 grit diamond on a bat lap and a 14,000 grit diamond on a bat lap is, for me, what John Gearloose is selling for the diamond stick at the time. He used to have a 14,000 grit diamond stick. Now he's changed it to a 13,000 grit diamond stick. So if I say 14,000 grit diamond on a bat lap, it's now 13,000 grit diamond on a bat lap, unless John Rolfe changes it back to a 14,000 grit diamond stick. But it works great, and I'll continue to work on this stone. Okay, I finished pre-polishing the crown with my 12M, and I slowed it down to 400 RPMs, and I think I've got a good enough pre-polish now that I may be able to go straight to polish. And I think slowing it down to 404 on the Ultratech, which I think is 400 RPMs, made a difference. And I do see an inclusion on the crown right there. So hopefully when I cut the crown, the table, that'll cut out, not sure. I may be stuck with a slight inclusion there on the table, but maybe when we get to the crown, we'll be able to get rid of that. I'm not sure. So let me try to polish it. All right, so what I've decided to do with this inclusion is it's right on the surface, and it may cut out all of it when I cut the table. It may leave a little bit, I just don't know. So what I decided to do was to go ahead and set my Ultratech up to cut the table now, and that's because I cut the girdle and I left 0.5 millimeters. So if I cut almost all of this out and there's a little bit left, I can bring the girdle down. 0.3 is fine. A lot of fasteners, 0.2 for a girdle is fine. This is a small stone, so 0.2 would be perfectly fine. So I'll go ahead and try to at least pre-cut, pre-polish the table and see if it gets rid of that inclusion. And if not, I will bring the girdle down a little bit and see if that gets rid of that inclusion, because the worst place for an inclusion is right on the table, and ours is right on the table. So let me try to work on the table and see if this inclusion goes away. Okay, I've started hitting the inclusion and started cutting it. It's right there's the inclusion. And I have, right there is where my meats are. So I've still got a little ways to go down. So I'll go down a little further to hit my meats and see if that takes it out, the inclusion. And if I have to go beyond that meat point, then I'll go back and recut the C1 and C2. But at least I haven't polished them. All I did was cut them and pre-polish them. So let me see what it takes to get rid of this inclusion. Okay, I believe I've worked out that little inclusion, but I did end up cutting through my meat points on the crown there. So I'm gonna have to go back and cut those first two set of instructions and bring my girdle down, but I have plenty of room. Again, my girdle was just about 5.5 millimeters, and I can bring it down to 0.2 with no problem, maybe a little more if I need to. Okay, I put a little bit of oil on the table there so we can see it a little better. So yeah, it appears that inclusion is gone. So I'll take the stone out of my table adapter and set it back up to cut the crown and go back and recut those first two facets and then polish them up. So the main thing is I was lucky and I got the inclusion out of the stone. Okay, I've moved the girdle down from, you can see where the girdle line was, and down to here. So this is just over 0.3 millimeters. It was right about 0.5 millimeters. So I can bring it down to 0.3, and a lot of cutters I know liked a girdle at 0.2 even. So I'm okay. And I think that'll give us enough room to cut, if I can get that in focus, the two tiers here and get them to line up and the points to meet, and still the points to meet the table. I think we'll be okay with that, and plenty of girdle. So let me work on bringing that new girdle all the way around the stone. Those few times when things actually work out perfectly are very refreshing. So our girdle is now right at 0.3 millimeters, which is perfectly fine for a girdle, and the meat's all meat. I just need to cut the table and bring it down just a tiny bit, and then we'll be done cutting our ring of fire. So our table polished right up, and I've got all the meats exactly where I want them. So now I will take our stone and soak it in the acetone and release it from the DOP, and we'll weigh it and measure it and send it off to BOPIE. In this video, I used a leftover piece of amethyst from a previous project and used it to cut the ring of fire design. This gem fastening design is 4 flat pieces of rough. It's not difficult to cut, and in my opinion, gem cutters of any skill level would enjoy cutting ring of fire. Please let me know in the comments if you have cut ring of fire, and if so or if not, what gem fastening diagram is your go-to design when you have a flatter piece of rough to cut. And if you do cut ring of fire in the future, please drop me a note and let me know how it turned out, preferably with photos. And as always, happy fasting, everyone.